Welcome back to Hot Takes and Deep Dives, and truly welcome to the moment where Queer as Folk is finally going to get its due. So everyone understands Queer as Folk was groundbreaking because it was the first drama on television to feature all gay characters. It was the #1 Showtime series for years and forever changed the way sexuality was portrayed on cable. Eileen Chaikin, who later created the L Word, fully credits Queer as Folk for paving the way for the L Word to get made at all. Please welcome Emmett Honeycutt and Ted Schmidt, also known as Peter Paige and Scott Lowell.
Hi, Jess.
Hello. Hi, Jess.
Thank you so much for doing this. I'm so excited to see both of you to be doing this as a joint experience. You are still best friends all of these years later. Where are each of you guys?
Sadly, very far apart from one another right now.
It's true. Scotty moved to New York a few years ago to kind of be closer to his mom, who's in Connecticut, and I miss the hell out of him out here in sunny LA. You may be far away, but you're always close to my heart, Scooby.
And are you guys still tight with the rest of the cast?
For the most part, yeah. Yeah, we all stay pretty well connected. We see each other a few times a year, and we still do charity events together and things like that. You know, we keep tabs on each other and, you know, send Michelle baby gifts and harass Sharon Glass online. And
very much so. Yeah, it really was the creation of a family doing the show. And because it was such a unique experience and we were all up in Toronto and only really knew each other. So the bond that's there between us and the crew of our show in a lot of ways too. We've remained a family since the year 2000.
Let's set the scene, for when Queer as Folk was thrust upon the pop culture landscape.
Thrust, the operative word.
I mean, if we're looking back in the year 2000, first of all, we weren't even looking to Showtime. It was really all about HBO with The Sopranos and Sex and the City. This is certainly a show that people would watch in secret. I watched it in college, renting the DVDs. Was 6 Feet Under on yet?
It wasn't on yet. 6 Feet Under started a year after we did.
Oh, interesting. I like that you have the
I know, because we won the GLAAD Award our first year, and then we lost it to 6 Feet Under every year after that.
We had one shot.
We did, and we got it.
Queer as Folk, I think, was Showtime's big play for the Sex and the City Sopranos audience. What were they trying to do? Create niche programming at that time?
The other stuff they had on the air was they had Soul Food on the air, the series, right? Showtime was having what success they were having out of doing that, sort of cobbling together niche audiences who were subscribing because of one show, basically on the network. And I think I actually don't think they thought Queer as Folk was a play for a Sex and the City audience. I think they thought Queer as Folk was a play for a queer audience. And what they discovered was that, there was a much bigger audience with an appetite to consume this content than anyone had imagined. And very quickly, our audience went from being, predominantly gay or at least majority queer to straight women. Straight women were our super fans and still are.
I think it's the viewing audience doubled, I think, from what Showtime had thought it was going to be because of that. And so, and it's where we took off, where we became #1 easily, very quickly, because Soul Food and Resurrection Boulevard were terrific shows as well, but they were targeting these niche audiences, and we were the one to branch out beyond that, much to surprise them. But I think the viewing audience was about 50-50. It's been more the fan base since then, and especially when we do conventions and things like that, it's 90% women and 10% gay men who will show up.
Have they ever been able to figure out why that is?
Well, there's some pretty obvious things, right? Queer as Folk was a soap. Dan and Ron hate it when you call it a soap, but it was a soap. It was great relationship, fun, juicy relationship storytelling, right? That's programming, quote unquote, for women. Those women are, it's emotional stories, and that's, been historically designed for women to consume. So they responded to that immediately. And there were a bunch of cute guys having sex. And I think the shocker to everyone is that women liked watching hot young guys get it on. And so it was kind of a double win. It was I remember getting stopped stopped by a cop in Times Square in New York City, and he tapped me on the shoulder and he was like, "You're on that show, right?" And I was like, I think so, yes. And he was like, "I just want to thank you, man, because I get laid by my girlfriend every Sunday night." True story.
Scott, did you ever have an experience like that? What types of people were recognizing you?
Yeah, I mean, what Peter described is very accurate, especially the part where, like, no one wanted to say the name of the show. And that still exists to this day a little bit. Like, yeah, you're on, you have to say it for them. There's something about the name of the show that still is dangerous for people to say. And I had a similar experience to Peter as far as a straight guy coming up to me and saying, like, yeah, my girlfriend made me watch it, and like, if you squint your eyes a little bit, you kind of all look like chicks. So it's like, I can get through it.
We weren't very hairy. None of us were very hairy.
No. There was not a lot of hair going on. But yeah, I mean, for me, and I think Peter had some of this as well, too, because we were kind of the everyman, gay men kind of thing compared to some of the other characters. So you would get a lot of people like, "Oh, I am so you," or "I am so," like, whatever. That was a surprise to me of the volume of people who just so related to this character and had to tell you that and felt very, felt this connection to you. And that lasted throughout the whole series, where a little bit of the confusion of reality and fantasy was there quite a bit, where they would mix us up with the characters a lot more. But I for one was shocked. I didn't know it was going to be quite the success it was, and in the way it was Showtime's Sopranos in some ways. And I wasn't aware of that until I think, like, we were well into shooting and we were about the 7th episode or so when they came up to start letting us know, all right, press is going to start coming up. And then we had this whole, like, sit down. You remember, Peter, this whole, like, sit down, get yourself ready. Your lives are going to be unearthed now. And you need to think about how you're going to answer these questions that they're going to ask you. And you're going to be under the microscope a bit. And it didn't hit me really till then. I'm like, oh, holy hell.
How did they media coach you guys? Like, considering the main question that outlets would be curious about would be your own sexuality, how did the network PR people advise you to answer the questions? I mean, Gale Harold is still an enigma today.
Well, he's super private, but neither did Scott. Scott and Gale both made a very kind of purposeful decision not to talk about their sexuality because they're straight. They were just like, I just want you to meet the character where the character's at and not worry about what I do in my off time. It was sort of the opposite of what many people generally do. I remember the network, PR people pulled Randy and me aside because we were the two openly gay ones in season 1, and they said, you don't have to answer the questions, you don't have to say anything, don't do any, just because you can just avoid it. Da, da, da. And Randy and I looked at each other and were like, we're going to be on a show called Queer as Folk, whose tagline is "No apologies, no regrets." And we're going to be evasive about our sexuality? Like, no, that's not going to work. That doesn't feel right. And it was just abundantly clear to both of us that, like, that was not the road we were going down. And everyone had, okay, whatever you want to do. But it was so important to us to honor the ethos of the show.
Yeah, and it was very, and again, you have to put it in context, like you're talking about, Jess, and going in the Wayback Machine to the days of Blockbuster in 2000. Like, for us, even in the casting of this show, there were thousands of actors who would not audition for this show. Entire agencies, the agency that represented the creators of our show, would not let any of their actors come into audition for Queer as Folk. Playing a gay character, let alone being out in Hollywood, was still a frightening thing. And so the bravery of Peter and Randy to do so was amazing. And I'll also throw in there, coming in the second season of the show, but Robert Gant as well too he was like a bankable leading man, straight dude on camera, and he really struggled. And I know he talked a lot to Peter and he talked a lot to Randy when he came into the show. What do I do? How do I do this? And so it was a big deal. And so, Peter kind of talks about it like, yeah, how could we not? But it was a scary thing.
Let's talk about that Larry King interview. So for listener context, the entire cast was on Larry King Live, and he asks them specifically who is gay and who is gay versus who is not. And Robert Gant, who played Ben, Michael's partner, wasn't publicly out at the time and denies being gay. What was the vibe after that interview?
I don't remember exactly, but I don't think he said he wasn't gay. I think he evaded the question in a way that he did not like. He didn't feel good about that, for sure. He just wasn't quite ready. It wasn't not very long into his tenure on the show. He'd only been there, I feel like a few weeks or a month or two.
Totally.
So he was, as Scott said, I mean, he and I had talked for hours and hours and hours and hours and hours about what it was he was risking, you know? He, as Scotty said, he was the boyfriend on every sitcom on NBC.
He was on an episode of Friends.
He was on Friends. He played her boyfriend on Caroline in the City, and that was his bank. And so, but that Larry King, God rest his soul, like was trying to do right by it, I think, but like literally the only thing he could ask us is if we were really gay, and those of us who were really gay, he was like, really, you're really, really gay. Really, you really do that. Marlon Brando kissed me once, but I mean, that was Marlon Brando. Really, you really do that. You really stick things in your butt. Like it was really, it was that. And then the straight guys, he was like, you really pretend to do that? Even though you don't really do that? Like that was the whole.
Yeah. What's it like kissing guys? What's that like?
It's so funny. It reminded me, in going back and watching it, it's almost like I don't know if you guys watched the Framing Britney Spears documentary, but if you watched that, the early interviews that she had with Diane Sawyer, the questions that were asked of her, about like her virginity, it sort of the parallel version of that. Just like, this is all you've got? Like, I mean, you've got writers on the show. You can't think of a more interesting question. And also, how rude is it to just straight up ask?
It really is. I think that was the thing for me. It was like we were on Larry King, like one of the great interview journalists of our time. And he couldn't think of anything else to ask us. Like that entire writing staff, as you said, couldn't come up with another question besides, really, you're a queer? Like there was so much to talk about. I really appreciated, by the way, when you introduced us on the show, you said the show changed the way that sexuality itself, any kind of sexual activity, is used in storytelling on camera. And I really believe Queer as Folk did that. I totally agree with you. The very first article written about Queer as Folk was in New York Magazine, and it said, Queer as Folk makes Sex and the City look like a Saturday morning cartoon. And
totally,
that led to my stepmother having a full-on meltdown, which is another story for another conversation. But it's true that there was so much more to talk about the cultural significance of that show and to talk to us about our experiences and that it was just disappointing. It was just disappointing to have arrived at that place and not get anything out of it except I kissed Marlon Brando.
I concur with Peter. I think we were all so thrilled it was one of those you've made it moments, right?
I mean, you're on CNN.
They're on CNN, that you're part of the zeitgeist. And it was one of the few moments where Queer as Folk really was hugely in the national zeitgeist in that way, because I think, as Peter mentioned, I think we got eclipsed by 6 Feet Under and some other shows in a lot of ways in terms of being a media darling in doing what we were doing. So it was very exciting. And I guess I had a bit of the advantage of going in the second segment. So I got to watch that whole first segment and just like stag the weight of what this was. So, but the advantage it gave me is I went on and I didn't take it very seriously. And I didn't, because I just was so, the disappointment was there. And I was like, well, I might as well just have fun because.
So where were each of you in your lives and careers when the script landed at your feet?
I had been in LA about 3 years, and I had been guest starring on sitcoms and things mostly. I was sort of one of the other choices to play Jack on Will and Grace, and had missed that moment. And then in the subsequent kind of 9 months since that show had been on the air, I had lost out on several jobs because I reminded people too much of Sean Hayes.
It was between you and Sean Hayes? Or you
there
and
were
a
other
couple
people.
other people?
There were other people in the mix. When I auditioned, they said to me, and I quote, "You're fantastic. We're taking a guy tomorrow to network. We're not going to take you up against him. If he doesn't get the job, we will take you." He was their choice. But if he had not gone, I was the next choice. Anyway, I don't want to disrespect the other guys who tested against him, but that's the exact truth of how it went down. But the upsetting thing was, for 9 months after that, I was testing for all these shows, and every time I would test, they would say, "Oh, we really like him, but he reminds us a little too much of Sean Hayes." And I was like, "Is this it? Is this my career? Is my career going to be like the guy who almost got Will and Grace? Is that going to be the story I tell at dinner parties? Like, that sucks." And then Queer as Folk came along, and I remember reading it, having my mind blown, just being like, I walked into my first audition and I held up the script and I was like, are we doing this? And they said every word, and I was like, I'm in. And so I was ripe and ready and hungry and determined. That's where I was.
And where did you grow up?
I grew up and down the East Coast. My parents were divorced. They moved a lot. I lived with both of them. It's really, it's like a long, long list of states.
Yeah.
I had gone to high school in North Carolina, college in Boston. I lived in New York for a brief period of time. I went to Portland, Oregon for a couple of years, and then made my way to LA.
And as a young gay kid, obviously there was no Queer as Folk, there was no Will and Grace, there was no, even Ellen. What were the images in pop culture that types of things were you seeking out?
Well, first of all, there weren't anything, there was like Uncle Arthur on Bewitched. Like there were some kind of coded queers, but, which I did, and I did recognize them. There was something, you know what I mean? But like, I wanted to become an actor because of Laverne and Shirley. Like they were, that was why I wanted to be on television. And then there was that sort of fledgling queer independent film thing happening. And so that fed me some ideas about possibilities. But I'll be honest, coming out of acting school, I went to a really good acting school, and I really struggled in New York, and thought like, maybe there's no place for me. Maybe I'm too gay. Maybe I'm not cute enough. Like I had all these stories about why I wasn't succeeding. Moved to Portland for a couple of years, did some theater. And in that time, Friends went on the air. And it sounds kind of silly, but I watched Friends and I was like, I can do that. What those people do, I can do. And it gave me a belief that there was a place for me in Hollywood. And a manager saw me doing a play in Portland and was like, "You're ready. You should be in LA." And I was like, "I think you're right." And I came to LA and booked the very first job I auditioned for. And 3 years later, there was Queer as Folk. Felt like a long time, but really wasn't looking
And
back.
Scott, what about you? Like, where were you in your life, personally and professionally, at the time the script came to you?
Well, I want to first add an addendum to what Peter just said. He also watched Friends and thought to himself, those are actually my friends. And he, to this day, still talks about them, like my friend Joey and my friend Monica.
I don't actually say my friend Joey.
He says my friend.
I will tell stories that happened on Friends as if they happened to my friend.
So my friend Ross, he one time.
No, I don't say that. I'll be like, oh my God, do you remember that time that friend of mine had blah, blah, blah? And they're like, that's a plot of Friends, Peter. That's what happened.
So I just, it's just an important addendum I wanted to add to that very touching story. I mean, Peter and I, and again, why we clicked from the moment we were sitting in the elevator well, waiting to go in and test at Showtime before anybody else showed up at the office because we're nerds and got there early. Like we came from a somewhat similar background in terms of, I grew up here on the East Coast in Connecticut and, planned to go to New York, but ended up actually in Chicago, starting my career there, and was there for a decade just doing theater. I was a big theater snob. I was not interested in film or television really much at all, until a friend of mine started writing some things and got me interested. And I had enough people in Chicago saying, like, you have a really big head. It would look good on camera. You should go to Los Angeles. And so many of my friends had moved to LA from Chicago, so it seemed pretty natural. So I moved out there in January of '98. So I hadn't been out there very long. And I started out there, again, because I hadn't done much camera work in Chicago. I started doing commercials really quickly in Los Angeles that were great training grounds, because a lot of the commercial directors in Los Angeles are these wonderful film or TV directors, and it's kind of their day job is doing commercials. So I got all this on-camera training that I got paid very nicely for and learned a lot. And soon after, like Peter, started doing the sitcom things, Frasier, Caroline in the City, And then Queer as Folk came along. So it happened very quickly, and I just happened to be ready. And again, going back to what I mentioned earlier about all these actors who would not audition for the show, it opened the door up to people like Peter and myself who, I had tested for a couple things as well, but like nothing had really hit. And we didn't have the resume or experience film or TV wise that a lot of other people did, but it opened the door to people like us.
And what was the reaction of your agents or managers, whatever representation you had? Did they encourage you to go in for it? Or were they kind of like, I don't know, this could be too much?
They warned me, jumping ahead after first they were very cruel when I booked the thing. My agents, because I had my main agent and then the agent that was actually covering the project phoned me up, and they were on the speakerphone. They're like, hey, yeah, look, so we just had our company retreat this last weekend, and at these retreats every year, we have to make some really tough decisions about what clients we're keeping on and which clients we're letting go. And it's often a really, really tough choice of who we are really passionate about. And they totally led me on oh, they're dropping me. And then they said yeah, you booked it. I was like, great. But what followed that then was, we want to let you know, our business affairs office thinks this is the worst contract they've ever seen. The money is terrible, all this stuff. You shouldn't take it. But also you need to think about this is, 6 years, because that's originally what the contract was for, 6 years of, playing a gay character in Hollywood at this time. And you need to think about, so that's all I got. Peter, I think you had more, didn't you?
Interestingly enough, so I remember a casting director approached me at the gym and said, I just heard Showtime bought the rights to Queer as Folk. If I were you, I'd make a phone call, because he knew my work. And I was like, oh, interesting. And so I was in first day of auditions, first day of callbacks, and I remember getting a whole script, which was 200 pages long, by the way. It was the first 3 episodes of the show. So it was it was like a tome. And I remember reading it and kind of having my mind blown. My agents, I don't know that they had read it. I think they had sort of heard about it and heard it was going to be splashy or whatever, but they were like, whatever. My manager, who was openly gay, was all for it until we were screen testing. And when we were screen testing, they sent over a regular contract, which was indeed a terrible contract financially at the time, but it came with a 20-page nudity rider. A 20-page nudity writer. It was 2 pages describing that you're agreeing to participate in this kind of storytelling, and then it had 18 pages of the script attached to it that were sex scenes, basically between Brian and Justin, saying even if you're not doing these in the pilot, you are going to be called upon to do scenes like this, and you're agreeing to do it. And my manager called me when that came through and was like, "You're not doing this show," and I was like, "I'm sorry, what?" And he was like, he's like, "You're not doing this show." He was like, "It is so obvious your career is about to happen." He was like, "You're testing all the time. You're about to pop." He's like, "I'm just afraid that if I try to take you to ABC, they're going to say, I can't put him on ABC. I just saw him getting ass fucked over on Showtime." And I was like, I think this is important. And I think I have to do this show, but let me sleep on it. I called my best friend, who is, by the way, Krista Vernoff, who now runs Grey's Anatomy and Station 19 and
yes,
the new show Rebel coming out next week. And Krista was like, "Hold on, let me get out my tarot cards." So she pulls out her tarot cards, and she's like, and Krista was, by the way, she wasn't exactly saying it, but she was leaning towards don't do it. She was leaning towards I think maybe your manager's right. And she literally pulled the first card and she went, "Oh." She pulled the second card. She went, "Oh." And she pulled one more card, and I was like, "What?" And she was like, "You have to do the show." The cards are saying you have to do the show. It's going to change your life, and it's going to change the world. And I was like, "Oh, well, that's pretty clear." And she was like, "It couldn't be more clear."
And I know, Peter, you also auditioned for the role of Ted.
That is true.
So what's the story behind that? You initially got the write-up for Emmett. You went in there, and then at the last minute, which one did you audition for first?
I was brought in to read for Ted. But when I read the script, I was like, I'm not getting this job. I'm not playing. I just knew I wasn't going to book Ted. So I prepared Emmett. And I went into casting. I read for Ted, and Linda Lowy was like, "Great, I'm going to give you a call back." And I said, "Hey, can I read Emmett for you?" And she was like, "Did you not hear me? I just said I'm giving you a call back for Ted." And I said, "I know. I just have a weird feeling." And she was like, "Okay." And I read for Emmett, and she said, I have never said this before in my entire career. Who do you want to go in front of the producers for? She's like, I don't care. And this was the universe at work, because I don't know that I would have gotten the job if I had gone in reading for Emmett. I went in for Ted, and within 30 seconds, Dan and Ron were whispering, and they stopped me. Stop. You're fantastic. You're not Ted. They were like, they sort of looked at, they were like, would you go out and would you come back in and read for Emmett? And I just looked at the casting director and I smiled and I said, yeah, I'd be happy to. That sounds like a great idea. And I was totally prepared for it. So I went out, I spent 2 minutes, I came back in, and according to them, they never looked at another Emmett ever again.
Were you guys familiar with the British version?
I did not watch the British version until just right, like my work session before my screen test. I had heard of it, but I had not watched it. And it almost cost me the job because the character was so different.
So yeah. I bring up the British version because, well, so many reasons. Russell T Davies, the original creator of Queer as Folk, he created several huge shows, but most recently he created It's a Sin for HBO Max, which is a wonderful show that I can't recommend highly enough. But Scott, your character, the character of Ted, dies in, I think, the third or fourth episode of the original show. Yeah. Is that what you went in expecting to happen, or like?
No, I did not find this out until I got up to Toronto because I didn't see the show. I didn't want to watch it after, like, once I got it, especially. I didn't, like, our show was our show and I didn't want any kind of influence in that way. And I got up to Toronto and I got up a few days before everybody else, and I went right to this disastrous costume fitting. And while I was at the costume fitting, where they were dressing me in leather shorts and like vests, like they were dressing me like a leather daddy and I was like, I don't think this is this character. And there are Polaroids that exist somewhere of me.
It's the best Polaroid. It might be my favorite photograph ever taken of all time. And that includes like Stephen Meisel shooting Kate Moss. Like, it's the best.
I look pretty miserable. But at that wardrobe fitting, someone said, like, oh yeah, I love the show. We watch it up here. Because in Canada, it was very popular because they're part British. And so they said to me, which character? And I was like, oh, I'm this guy. And they're like, oh, you're the guy who dies. I was like, huh? But I have this contract that I signed for at least 9 episodes. So I had no idea. That.
I knew that. And that was one of the things, my factors into my decision was go Emmett, because they might kill off that Ted character.
Totally.
Did you also have friends who told you, like, you do not want to play that guy? Like, psychologically, they told you you don't want to play that dude.
Yes. When there was debate back and forth about which lane I was going to be in, I did have a friend who was like, I know which part I want you to get. And I was like, which one? And they were like, I do not want you playing the sad sack for 5 years.
I'd love to know, what was your initial impression of each other and also the rest of the cast?
For Peter and I, again, as I mentioned earlier, we met at our screen tests, having gotten there at least a half hour early, if not.
We were an hour early. Scott.
An hour early, yeah.
7 a.m. They didn't open the doors until 8.
Yeah, so the door, like, we took the elevator up and we're stuck in this hallway because the doors aren't open. They're literally like dropping off stacks of newspapers like next to us because we're sitting on the floor. And we just clicked in immediately. Yeah, so Peter I took to right away. And I remember even someone I was dating at the time said something like, oh, he's going to be your best friend. And everybody else, for the most part, we all just fell in really quickly with one another and really seemed to have a sense of common purpose to what we were doing. And most of us were all theater people. So it just felt like, we all came together as an ensemble. It never was, the star and the supporting cast. We were all of equal importance to one another and to the show. And I don't know, I feel like that was very quickly. So I don't have like this. I remember seeing Randy, and Peter can talk about too, seeing Randy at the test and going like, oh, he's really young. Hal, I kind of knew of from, him being on Talk Soup. Gale was super quiet. Gale was a really slow onion to peel, but everybody else was so open. And then, oddly enough, Sharon came in a few weeks late after we had all really met and bonded and worked together. And so we were all a little nervous about her coming in and a little nervous about this big Hollywood star coming in.
Freaking Glass.
Yes, exactly. And, really excited, but just having some nervousness of how is that going to affect this ensemble we've created. Will she fit in? Will she won't fit in? And she just, as soon as she opened her trap, we knew she
was one of us.
Yeah.
So some little nuances to that story. Scotty was, I think, the only person who only had to screen test once, or who got the job from the first screen test. So Scott booked it right away. I had to go back again because I had screen tested against 2 black guys, and the president of the network was like, "So which of the black guys are we casting?" And Dan and Ron were like, "Oh, we don't want them. We actually want Peter." Mm-hmm. And he was like, "I didn't even look at Peter." And they were like, "Okay, we'll bring him back." So I had to go back again. So between the 2 screen tests, I met everybody who ended up being on the show. And interestingly enough, it was like people in screen tests, it's a nerve-wracking experience, and people tend to either kind of cling to each other and support each other, or they tend to push themselves off to the sides and isolate. And it was the people who clung together who became the cast. Mm-hmm. Like we just found each other for some reason. So I had met everyone basically who got the job by the time we got on a plane. But it happened very quickly. I got cast on June 26th, and on July 10th, I was moving to Toronto for 9 months. But so it happened so fast, and we were all plucked out of our lives. Like Taya Gill was the only person from Toronto. So the rest of us, we had no friends. We if you wanted to eat dinner with somebody, you ate dinner with somebody from the cast. That was
right.
So it bonded us very, very quickly by nature.
And I had heard that they initially, during the filming of that first season, they didn't want you to see anything that you guys had shot already, the way it was being cut together. And then eventually you were shown, I guess, the pilot. What was your reaction to seeing the actual show for the first time?
It was pretty much, it had been a long time. We started working in July, and we didn't see it till the end of October, right, Scott? Is that
right? That's absolutely right.
Yeah. And we were at Scott's apartment, as a matter of fact, Hal's apartment. Mm-hmm. And we were all there together, and it was like, we knew the show had been a big hit in the UK, and we knew we had a chance of being a really big hit as long as they didn't back down. As long as they didn't Americanize it and make it safer and more palatable to people, as long as we stayed in your face, we knew this was something special. And I think when we saw it, and like the first 15 minutes is basically, Justin getting rimmed, we were all like, oh shit, we did it. We did the thing. And I remember all of us kind of piling on Gale and just being like, you're about to be a giant fucking star.
To see each other as television characters in this show was stunning. Yeah, I mean, the first time you see Gale, I was just like, what? That guy? What? And, with the lights and the lasers and like all these things going on, it was goosebumps. It was really so exciting to see that that's what this was.
And everyone had an amazing moment in the first. By the way, the pilot ended up becoming the first 2 of those 3 hours. They cut it down, and you knew every single person had a moment in that thing where you were like, "Wow, there you are, look at you." And they had, interestingly, one of our producers had produced Friends. And he was the president of Warner Brothers when they did Friends. And he sat us all down and said, your lives are going to change. And he said, I have not seen an ensemble cast this strong since Friends and ER. And we were like, oh, put us in that company, please, and thank you. But he said, and he also said so wisely, he said, listen, the audience will find each of you at different times, but they will find all of you. All of you are fantastic, and all of you are doing fantastic work, and all of you are going to be great on this show. Give the audience a chance to find you. And I'm so grateful for that, because it took them a while to find Emmett. It took them a while to find Ted. And when they did, it was totally worth the wait.
So much of the show hinged on Gale Harold's performance as Brian Kinney. I mean, he really was the face of the show in the beginning. Are you able to speak to what he went through, considering he was a theater actor just suddenly thrown into the cultural zeitgeist?
I mean, we can speak from what we observed. I would never attempt to climb inside of Gale's brain because I might never get out. But, but you need to understand, first off, like, yeah, he'd been a theater actor for like a few years. He Gale is somebody he's got a true artist's soul. Like, he had been a photographer and a sculptor and built and rebuilt motorcycles, and like, and he kind of stumbled into the acting thing. And it was all still fairly new to him. He wasn't even in the actors union at that point in time. He had not been doing it that long. So it was a lot. And he is also, a very private person in a lot of ways. And I think Randy went through a little bit this as well, more so perhaps than the rest of us, where they were playing these very hyper-sexualized characters in a way that they were not used to putting out into the world in any way, and don't carry themselves that way in their everyday lives. So the expectations that people projected onto them, I think, was challenging for sure for both of them, and made Gale kind of, I think, want to retreat from that a little bit. But he was so dedicated to his work and it being honest and true and brave for the community. I think he, like myself and others, felt like this show is so vitally important to the LGBTQ community that we have to get this right. And we owe it to them not to shrink back from anything. And so he just went for it all the time and just kept digging deeper and deeper. And because it was fairly new to him, was looking to improve all the time and asking for feedback in that way all the time, I found.
I think here was an intensely private human being who was like, acting is interesting. Putting on another person's skin, that's interesting. And then he became famous. And that was, I think, a real challenging duality for him.
The two of you guys, like you said, you were initially written as the Greek chorus, very similar in a way to how on the L Word, Alice and Shane and Dana were kind of the Greek chorus. And then later on, their characters really became an emotional arc of the series. Aside from what was written on the page, what did each of you infuse into the characters or choose to portray through the characters that really came from you?
What's on the page for Emmett quite often lacked the Peterness that he brought into it, which is what you've seen and what you have been hearing throughout this past hour or so. This intelligence, this toughness, this extreme
tough. I'm not tough.
You're very tough, and a deep level of masculinity that's there that can be masked by. There can be a persona that's put on top of that to keep things light and fluffy, as it were, for whatever reason, whether it be for protection or to make someone else feel comfortable. But underneath that is this grit that's there all the time of somebody who is very driven and is going to find his way to get what he wants from life while protecting his friends, fiercely protecting his friends, and fighting for what he believes in. And that's what was amazing with Emmett, for as funny as he was and as sweet and as dumb as he sometimes was, that you knew when you were acting with him that there was something more underneath there. Like, you always knew there was more to Emmett there than a more surface portrayal would have been. And in so many ways, thank goodness he didn't play Jack, not for Peter's bank account, but for creating a wholly unique, never before seen gay man, a Nelly gay man in television or in film that was so much more three-dimensional, had so much more going on for him.
What were your reactions when you saw that the writers were going to have Emmett and Ted get together romantically?
Well, we had pitched it.
Yeah.
We had pitched it.
Really?
Yeah, we had pitched it. I don't remember if we pitched it as a hookup or we pitched it as
we pitched it individually. Because we got at the end of the first season, I think it was the only time we were allowed to do this, was to come in and pitch our ideas for our characters. And so I went in to talk about my ideas for Ted, and Peter went in a separate session to talk about Emmett. And this was one of the things we both ended up pitching. And yeah, I don't remember if it was maybe more just like they wake up one morning after a crazy night at Babylon and be like what happened? And did they or didn't they? So I don't know that we said like full relationship, but there was some kind of a hookup thing.
Yeah. And I remember when we read that first episode where they started kind of trying to hook up, they were not that far ahead at that point in scripts. And they were like, oh, we want to see more of this. Like, we want to go down this road. I loved it. I thought it was really fascinating, and I thought it was a really interesting story and human, but it was equally uncomfortable for us as it was for Ted and Emmett, because we're really good friends, and all of a sudden we're making out and having, I vividly remember at one point him being like, your balls are on my knee, but it's fine. And it's like, just things you don't say to your friends every day. At least I don't. It was a wild ride, but I loved that story. I thought it was very sweet, them trying.
There was no really fully realized template for Ted and Emmett of where they were going with things. And I think Ron and Dan...
You were dead, and my character was so different that it was kind of...
So different.
More so than any other characters on the show, it really seemed like they were writing for the two of you, for Peter and for Scott.
I think so. And I think they also... I think they liked our chemistry in general, things like that. But I think it took them a little well into the first season to realize there was something special in us as actors and as a team. So
they said it. They pulled me aside in the pilot and said, well, we were shooting the pilot, and we're like, we didn't think we'd get an actor for him. And we thought we'd get a snippy, funny queen. And that's what we wrote. We've already written the first 8 scripts. So that's what's on the page for the first 8 scripts. You keep doing what you're doing, but you got stories coming. And I think we were Michael's henchmen, right? We were Michael's left and right, like angel and devil, basically. Mm-hmm. And they quickly were like, oh God, we can double our story engines if we let those two guys go and do what they do and find Michael. That's when, the chiropractor came in.
Yeah. And you see it pretty soon after that, because it's like it's the 9th or 10th episode where you get the birthday party thing, and Emmett thinks, he might be positive and makes the pact with God, and then all that stuff, like very quickly you see once those initial 8 episodes ended, all of a sudden Ted and Emmett have a lot more interesting things to do. And
I am convinced that everyone's hair drives them nuts. Mine is curly and gets too dry in the winter, too oily in the summer, and I'm constantly having to buy new shampoo and conditioner to just battle the elements. The issue is that there's no one-size-fits-all shampoo or conditioner because we're all coming to the table with a unique body and hair chemistry. Well, I recently found a customized shampoo and conditioner solution called Prose, and it's kind of been saving my life. All you do is go on their website, prose.com, you fill out a quiz about your hair. For example, your hair type, how it feels, where it falls on the oily to dry spectrum, plus questions about your eating and exercise habits. And with Prose's algorithm, Prose finds a unique blend of ingredients to treat your exact concerns. I've been using the custom shampoo and conditioner, plus been experimenting with their hair oil and leave-in conditioner, and it's honestly made my hair more shiny and more full than it's been in months. All of their custom hair products are freshly made to order. And FYI, if you're not happy with the results, Prose will take back the products, no questions asked. So here's the deal. Prose is the healthy hair regimen with your name all over it. Take your free in-depth hair consultation and get 15% off your first order today. Just go to prose.com/hot takes. It's prose.com/hot takes for your free in-depth hair consultation and 15% off. Peter, one of the most interesting things you said on here that you said that there were 2 other people who were up for the role of Emmett were 2 Black actors.
Yeah.
Now,
one of them is Billy Porter.
You're kidding me.
No, Billy Porter. It was Billy Porter, Wayne Wilkerson, and me. Those are the 3 people who tested.
Holy shit.
And Billy, to his credit, by the way, Billy, class fucking act, man. This guy, Billy is such a classy guy. I've been rooting for Billy his entire career because of this experience. He tests against me, doesn't get the job. He comes to the premiere. I would no more have gone to the premiere of a show I didn't get that I was the other choice for than The Man on the Moon. Like, I couldn't have handled it. My ego couldn't have handled it. He came to the premiere. He hunted me down at the reception and said, now I know why I didn't get the job. And I said, come on, Billy. And he said, no, I'm not kidding. He said, I could not do what you did with that role. And I said, thank you, Billy. That's very sweet. He said, I mean every word of it. Congratulations. That was incredible. I'm so proud of you. And I'll never forget it. It was the classiest thing. And I was like, that is a grown-up who believes in his own talent, who is, I was just like, I learned so much that day from Billy Porter.
I so hooked onto that when you mentioned that you were up against 2 Black actors for the role, because one of the main criticisms is, frankly, the lack of diversity in race,
that's our
other sexuality.
That's our criticism of the show.
Absolutely.
Us as a cast, we were aware of it and knew we were failing as a show to rectify it.
What was the issue there? Like, is it that they could not find other actors? Like, that's an impossibility.
It's hard to say. I mean, I don't know, Peter, do you have
that's good. That's a good answer. It's hard to say.
Yeah.
I will say, this was 20 years ago. It was a different time, and I'm not saying it shouldn't have been. I'm just saying it wasn't the priority that it should have been.
And I remember when we finished shooting the first season, we'd go 9 months, pretty much nonstop. I mean, it was exhausting. And before we could go home, they sent us on a tour of college campuses to go talk to, because it was already airing by that point in time. And we went all across the country. On the East Coast, we went down to Tulane, I think, in New Orleans. And the last stop was Berkeley. And we were exhausted. And we got grilled by this one person who was just like, where are the people of color? Where are the trans people? Where are the this and this? And I can't remember who it was. One of us, I in my mind is me, but I don't know. We just lost patience. We're like, we're just the actors in the show. We don't have control over this. We hear you, but what do you want us to do? Because nothing would satisfy him. He was so upset. But it also was a great, for me at least, it was a great learning experience of how much the show mattered to people and how much this felt like the first time people had been, a community had seen themselves truly on television, and they all wanted to be in there. If we're going to see this much of us finally on television, we want to see all of us. I want to see myself and my microcosm represented in this show because I've waited so fucking long. Where am I? And that was important for us to know. But again, power structure wise, not a lot for us to do about it. But yeah, that was as Peter said, from the get-go, we knew. And it's a really complicated thing to say why.
Cut to, it's announced that Eileen Chaikin gets a deal with Showtime and they're going to do the L Word. Not the original title, but what would become the L Word, which would eventually replace you guys as the #1 show on Showtime. And I think really grab that gay audience, particularly women, gay and straight. What was the cast's, or maybe just speak for yourself, what was your reaction to the news that basically they were creating this other gay show that was going to be the female version of Queer as Folk?
I mean, honestly, I was like, good for them. Good. I mean, there's so little lesbian representation in the kind of media pantheon that I was thrilled that they were going to get to kind of play central. And I had watched Michelle and Taya really struggle with being kind of sidelined during our show. And, really only getting to carry stories around giving birth and how they related to Brian. Like that was really, all they were given to do. And I was like, this is great. There's plenty of room for this.
Scott, what about you?
I was thrilled too. I was glad to see that we in some ways were birthing something else, and that this was, felt like it was going to be a part of a movement. My sister is gay also, so I was really thrilled for her to have that show for herself. I will admit to being resentful at the way it was allowed into the zeitgeist and the way that we were not. And my feeling was, and this is just my feeling, and again, no, this is nothing about the show itself. This is about society as a large. I felt very much the reason was that for that, much as we attracted single women to watch our show, I think a lot of straight guys were a lot more comfortable watching beautiful women get together, and that expanded their audience in a way that Showtime was maybe a little more interested with. And it was a lot easier for the media to write articles about and sell to the general public than gay men.
I think it was easier for the media to draw an exact parallel to Sex and the City. Because the initial tagline for the L Word was same sex, different city.
Didn't even know that.
It also seemed like the L Word had a larger budget around it. You guys had Sharon Glass, but I think building the L Word around Jennifer Beals definitely came with a lot of cachet. Plus, they had all of the recurring characters. They had Holland Taylor, Sybil Shepherd, Jane Lynch. it seemed they had a lot of power when it came to casting. I mean, even the reboot, like, how did you feel about the L Word reboot happening versus Queer as Folk?
Right.
Well, but there's more to that story than that. It's not just that. It's that Showtime owned the L Word outright. Showtime never owned Queer as Folk outright.
Yes, Peter, can you explain the difference? Because I know the L Word began with Showtime and ended with Showtime, so it was a very straightforward deal for them to just simply reboot it.
Because Queer as Folk started in the UK, it was originally bought by Warner. Like the chain of title on Queer as Folk is an incredibly complicated thing. So in order, so it was originally a Channel 4 BBC thing. They sold it internationally to Warner Brothers, who brought it to Showtime. And so all of those players, these big, huge international media conglomerate players, all have a finger on that contract. So if you want the rights to that show, you have to navigate all of this legal stuff. And it's incredibly complex. And like Showtime owns the characters of Emmett and Ted, right? But Channel 4 owns the title of Queer as Folk. But Warner Brothers owns international distribution rights to this. So it's an incredibly complex thing that even as now a veteran showrunner, I couldn't pick apart if I tried. So that's one of the reasons. The other thing I think that doesn't get put into that conversation that I think is just simply true is Showtime had gotten better. Showtime had a big hit show, and they knew better how to launch another hit show because we had been there before them. It's just that simple. And I do think that, women get press because they do glamour magazines. You can put Jennifer Beals on the cover of Cosmo. And you can't put Gale, there's kind of nowhere to put Gale Harold. Like maybe he gets a detail spread, but like it's not the same thing. The same tools are not there to use. So, but I think there are other things at play, and I think it's just a little bit of a muddy puddle that you have to kind of acknowledge all of it in order to see the full picture.
Yeah. Now, as the show is winding down, I guess, first of all, like, were you satisfied with the show's ending? And then ultimately, how did this affect your careers?
I was pretty satisfied with the show's ending. I kind of wanted Emmett to end up with Drew, if I'm being totally honest. Like, I really wanted Drew to show up and go.
The football player, right?
Player, yeah. I wanted him to show up and say, I've sowed some oats. But they were doing that with Ted and Blake. Thank you. God, it's been a while now that wasn't right there. With Ted and Blake. So I think they felt like they couldn't do that. But I thought the show as a whole, it said what it came to say. And as far as how it affected my career, I mean, I will say it kind of defined my acting career. I signed with a new manager shortly after Queer as Folk ended, and I said, I think this is going to be harder than you think. And she was like, you're crazy. She was like, you're not Emmett. Like the minute I sit down with you, I know you were playing a character. And then I realized, like, holy fuck, this guy's a really good actor because he's not who he was playing on television, who I believed him to be for 5 years. And I said, that may be true. But I think you're going to hit some walls. And a year later, she took me out to lunch and she said, Peter, if it doesn't say gay in a breakdown, no one is interested. She's like, I cannot get you in a door no matter what. And I think we're at the end of that moment in time. And I'm grateful for the actors behind me that they're not in the same place. I'm grateful for Neil and Zach Quinto and those people that things shifted just enough. They also, by the way, got their breaks playing straight guys. So it wasn't a double reinforcement of one idea.
As far as casting directors, like the people who would refuse to see you. Now, I had read that the majority of casting directors are gay guys. Now, is this because when they see people from Queer as Folk, did they just naturally have a prejudice because they have seen the show and so they're projecting all of this onto you?
A lot of them are gay guys. It's true. I think there is this still goes on in Hollywood. My really good friend, I have many good friends who are TV writers at this point, and one of them who's a gay guy, there was being given shit about casting. They were like, we're not only seeing gay guys for this or something like that. I think there is yes, I'm a gay male casting director, but I don't want to put I don't want you to think I'm biased toward gay people, so I'm actually biased against them a little bit to overcompensate. I don't really know. All I know is doors that had been open to me pre-Queer as Folk, the quirky neighbor, the snarky assistant who doesn't have a sexuality, the mean boss, those roles which I had tested for before Queer as Folk were closed to me after it. That's what I can say.
And Scott, what about you?
I think in my mind, I thought, like, as you said, Jess, in my mind, I thought the same thing. Like, oh, so many of the casting directors are gay men. The world is my oyster now. I have done my service to the community, and here I go. And I felt a little bit like the opposite came into it, to the point where a casting director who was the head of casting at one of the networks, my manager was just trying to get me a general meeting with him, and he would not meet with me. And she said, why won't you meet him? And he's like, I don't know. I just find him really arrogant, and I just don't like him. I just don't like him. She said, what are you talking about? And she said, let me send you some. So she sent him a tape or something. And he said, I'm an idiot. Please have him come in. And I sat down and talked to him, and he said, I have to apologize to you. I'm so used to when I'm, casting television, I look for actors who are their role, because it's just easier for a week-to-week series going on for many years. I don't want to have to worry about, can they act the part? I just want them to be the part. And if they can't just be the part, it's harder for me. And I just thought you were Ted, because my husband and I had been watching the show from the beginning, and I just thought that's who you were. And this is the head of a network casting. And so I think there was a bit of that happened. For me, honestly, it was the thing I felt more concretely was before Queer as Folk, I was always going in for comedies. And because of where Ted went in Queer as Folk, after that, like, I couldn't get seen for comedies.
There was a cultural shift that also happened around that time, Scott. Because I was the same way. I was the darling of NBC half hours. Like, I was in those things all the time. But while we were doing Queer as Folk, that 5-year period, they went from actors doing comedies to comedy people doing comedies. It became only Groundlings, UCB, and Second City people. Like, it only became those. You couldn't get arrested in a sitcom if you did not come through one of those programs.
That makes a lot of sense. I hadn't even thought of that. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it was challenging for that to kind of get back into that world. And other things had shifted as well while we were doing this show, in that, movie stars started doing TVs in the ways they didn't too. So it also used to be because it was after September 11th, and people went like, you know what? I don't want to fly around the world doing movies anymore. I want to sit in one city with my family and work, 9 months out of the year and be happy.
Perfect example on Showtime itself. After you guys, Mary Louise Parker in Weeds, she was a movie star.
Right. Yeah. Totally. So that happened a lot. So the usual food chain of you've been on a series and you'll go and get into another series, that doesn't happen anymore, because now movie stars are in those roles that you would have ordinarily at least been seen for in the past. So now you're bumped down to guest star roles, and people who used to be guest star roles, now they get bumped down. There's been a shrinking down of the working class actor in the 2000s that continues, I think. So I think it was challenging, but Queer as Folk also, like, hey, some people know who I am now, or at least they know ours on the show. A lot of them, they saw you're on Queer as Folk and they just don't know what it is, or they have an impression because they saw a few episodes a few years ago, but they haven't really seen the breadth of the work you've done. So in some ways, within the business, it didn't have the impact I thought it might. Outside in the real world, obviously, we're 20 something years later and people still stop you on the street and thank you for doing it. And that's, in the end, that's the legacy of the show for me, is that it's still changing people's lives. But career-wise, it gave me some name recognition, but I don't know that it hugely boosted my career.
We talked about how it was the female fans who kept the legacy alive and who want the reunion. Why do you think the men who watched the show sort of soured on it?
Look, some of them turned on it. I think some of them turned on it because it was too uncomfortable, because it was looking in a not entirely flattering mirror. Also, I just think, you guys were like, they were going out to bars. It was exciting and thrilling to see something they hadn't seen, and then they'd seen it. And then it was like, okay, well, what's next? What's new? What am I on to? So I think it was a combo platter of those things. I mean, I vividly remember lots of conversations where people would go and they go, "Are you on that show?" And I'd go, "Yeah." And they would go, "I don't like it." And I would go, "Oh, okay, why?" And there was a guy, I was in a steam room at a legit massage place once. And this guy was like kind of hitting on me and then told me he had coke in his locker and then asked me if I wanted to go home and have sex with him. And I swear to God, this all happens. And then a guy comes in and recognizes me. So a different guy comes in and recognizes, like, "Hey, oh my God, you're Peter Paige." And the guy who had hit on me, offered me coke, and asked me to go have sex with him said, "I don't like that show." And I said, "Why not?" And he said, I just don't think that it's real. Gay guys don't behave like that. I literally don't know what to say to you. I literally don't know what to say to you. True story.
And I will say also, like, something that was, something we miss about these kind of things in the world now, that Queer as Folk was a show that every Sunday, 10 o'clock, and I went and experienced it in disguise once, like all the gay bars would be up on the TVs and people would gather, like the party atmosphere around that show. Again, I know my sister every Sunday for all 5 years had a huge party, had people come over and watch the show every Sunday. And that community that it had, that's what I at least heard about and experienced more than people turning against it. And I think when I talk about now it feeling like it's mostly female fans who are the rabid ones about the show, I think gay men, I still hear from gay men a lot, but in terms of actively promoting it, wanting it, going to fan conventions, doing all those kind of things, that's where the energy is a little more people who are locked into that soap opera, and especially the Brian, Justin, and the, all that kind of stuff.
Peter, we have to talk about the fact that you created, executive produced, directed an incredible show, The Fosters, which ran for so many years, had a spinoff. Even Rosie did a whole guest arc. She was a recurring character. Also, Jennifer Lopez was an EP on The Fosters.
Yeah. My writing partner and I, at the time, decided we wanted to create a family drama. What kind of family drama do we want to do? Well, we're both queer men, so let's do a queer family drama. But at the same time, The New Normal was coming out, Modern Family was on, Glee had gay dads. It was like the gay dad thing felt like it was kind of being handled, mostly in comedy, but being handled. And then it just hit us like a ton of bricks. Like, every lesbian couple I know has kids or is talking about having kids or is adopting kids. Like, let's do that. And it's being serviced nowhere in the media landscape. And then the question became sort of, well, how did these two women create their family? And we kind of shoved it all in. We pitched the show around, got some interest, but just missed selling it a few places. And we realized we needed to attach some energy to it. Somebody who's going to help push it over the top of the hill. And a buddy of ours was running development for Jennifer's company and called us and said, "Do you have anything that feels right for Jennifer? Not for her to star in, but for her to produce." And we looked at each other and we were like, "What about The Fosters?" And basically we went and we pitched the show to them. They were like, "We love it, but why is it a Jennifer Lopez show?" And we said, Jennifer Lopez is the first multicultural 21st century superstar. And this is the world's first multicultural 21st century family drama. And they literally said, "Sold." And that was why. And Jennifer's aunt was a lesbian, and she was her favorite aunt was a lesbian, and she never got to kind of realize this version of her life. And so for Jennifer, it was about kind of honoring her favorite aunt.
I love that.
Yeah.
And finally, just like a final thing I want to share with the people listening is, Scott, you organized a whole Queer as Folk reunion, which people can watch on YouTube.
Yeah, it was crazy. It ended up going 4 hours, and
Scott took it on too. Scott produced the hell out of that and made it all happen. Scott is the reason that anything happens. With anything post Queer as Folk happens, it's because Scott made it happen.
It's amazing. Like, everyone can watch this on YouTube. You got every character was there, down to Blake and Ben, Robert Gant, and even the Ethan, the violinist. You had him on for a little interview. Yeah. So it's just amazing.
Hair and makeup team, the writers, Rosie was on. It's if you love the show, it is a great fun thing to kind of scroll through, because there's really stories.
We wanted there to be some, we were disappointed nothing else was going on for the 20th anniversary, and we wanted some kind of historical, because I know there are people who, I've heard of there are college courses being taught on Queer as Folk and where it fits in, especially into gay media history. And we just wanted to get some actual from the old horses' mouths.
Fantastic. Thank you guys so much. This was wonderful.
Thank you, Jess. It was a real honor. Thanks.
Everyone, you can follow me, Jess XNYC. That's where I have tons of videos from past interviews and also on YouTube as well. Just search Hot Takes and Deep Dive, my name, and hope to chat soon.
Hey there, Ryan Reynolds here. It's a new year, and you know what that means. No, not the diet. Resolutions. A way for us all to try and do a little bit better than we did last year. And my resolution, unlike big wireless, is to not be a raging and raise the price of wireless on you every chance I get. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment required, equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes on unlimited. See mintmobile.com for details.
Marketing is hard. But I'll tell you a little secret. It doesn't have to be. Let me point something out. You're listening to a podcast right now, and it's great. You love the host. You seek it out and download it. You listen to it while driving, working out, cooking, even going to the bathroom. Podcasts are a pretty close companion. And this is a podcast ad. Did I get your attention? You can reach great listeners like yourself with podcast advertising from Libsyn Ads. Choose from hundreds of top podcasts offering host endorsements, or run a pre-produced ad like this one across thousands of shows to reach your target audience and their favorite podcasts with Libsyn Ads. Go to libsynads.com, that's LIBSYN, ads.com today.